Hello everybody, my name is Phil Beecham. I was a college chemistry teacher for over 40 years, and I've studied global warming and climate change for several years. I'm here to share with you a little parable I wrote about climate change. Edward Wilson summed up our situation in this little short quote here. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. It has taken us in a direction that is terrifically dangerous, and we are approaching a point of crisis. So Edward Wilson was sometimes called the father of sociobiology, sometimes called the father of biodiversity, and he had a nickname of Ant-Man since he studied ants and other insects. Almost everyone has heard about global warming and climate change. Dedicated people are working towards solutions for many of the problems we face. However, some people deny they are real. Some people avoid thinking about them. Some people are paralyzed by fear of the possible future consequences. Many people are uncertain what to do, but hope we can find solutions to save ourselves. Honest hope emerges from the wisdom that recognizes the necessity that we have to do something. However, there are inescapable limits on what the future possibilities are. Those possibilities depend on what we are doing in the coming years. We can't know for sure what will transpire within those limits. To discover what is possible, we have to be searching for truth and confront the reality that exists. We have to act based on our best assessment of that reality, using the collective wisdom from our time on this earth. One thing is certain, if we get our story wrong, we'll get our future wrong. This is a story about energy, and we have to get it right. Energy is the heart of everything that happens to us and in us. The same is true about our planet Earth. We need energy in our work, our exercise. Even when sleeping, we are breathing, our hearts are beating, our blood is flowing, our brain is working, and every cell is metabolizing. We are familiar with many of these functions because we live 24/7 inside our bodies. But there are lots going on that we are not aware of and don't understand. If we are lucky, maybe we live 80 years, and that is our human view of the time scale of existence. Energy is also critically important for the miracles of Earth's cycles. We are familiar with some aspects of Earth's energy because this is our home. The sun provides warmth in the daytime, allows plants to grow, which we eat, and which feed the animals that we eat. It makes water evaporate that later falls as rain or snow. It makes weather patterns that affect our way of life, wherever we happen to live, from blazing heat to freezing cold. However, there are lots of details about Earth that are so complicated that we don't fully understand, or we aren't even aware of them. Partly we don't understand the details because Earth's timescale is so very different from our human timescales. Earth has existed for about 4.5 billion years, and changes that take hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years are a mere blink of an eye to Earth. One day in an 80-year-old human lifetime would equal 154,000 years in Earth's 4.5 billion-year-old age. This makes earthly changes a mystery to our human intuition, and until recently this was of no big concern. A long human life of 80 years seems like forever to us. It starts at birth, we have graduations, marriage, family, career, retirement, and ultimately death. Earth had a different path. Earth started 4.5 billion years ago. It took about 500 million years for microbial life to get started. And then it went almost a couple billion years before a new type of life, cyanobacteria, started figuring out how to make oxygen using photosynthesis. It took all the way up to about 4 billion years before any life forms, plants, left the ocean and went on to land. It took another 50 million years for the animals to follow the plants onto land. Just to give you a point of reference here, about halfway down the line, dinosaurs appeared, but they were wiped out by the asteroid in 66 million years ago. And here we are at this end. This tiny little dot is us. If Earth's entire history, all 4.5 billion years, was reduced to 1 year, the Industrial Revolution, which started us on the path that we find ourselves right now, would have started 1 second ago. that would equal 200 years. About 200 years ago, we began using newly discovered source of abundant energy in fossil fuels. So that was coal, oil, natural gas. Fossil fuel energy was far greater than our daily energy quota from the sun. This extra energy accelerated everything. It allowed us to grow our population from less than 1 billion people to its current level of almost 8 billion people. It allowed technological innovations beyond comprehension. It allowed medical and sanitation advances that increased life expectancy. It allowed development of new farming methods that provided more food than ever. It allowed travel modes that rapidly spread humans all over the world, leading to globalization we have today. Around the same time, we invented a capitalistic economic system that created an endless expectation of profit and growth at all costs, which is dangerously exceeding the limits of Earth's resources and is concentrating wealth in the hands of a small number of people. If you trace back Homo sapiens' origin, we actually go back maybe 200,000 to 300,000 years. But it's estimated that about 70,000 years ago, there might have been around 10,000 Homo sapiens. That's us. So not much happened. You can see it's pretty flat here. Okay, so about 70,000 years ago, there were 10,000. But by 3000 BC, that's 5,000 years ago, we had increased to about 14 million. So still a very, very small number for the entire Earth. Okay, by the time we get to about 1 AD or 0 AD, we were up to 250 million. It took all the way up to 1820. Okay, that's way out here, before we hit 1 billion people. But once we hit 1 billion people, we started going up fast. 2 billion, 3 billion, and now we're about 8 billion, probably headed towards 9 billion plus by 2050. So average life expectancy up to about the 18th century was very short, about 30 years. This was mostly because of high infant mortality and women dying in childbirth. In most countries today, life expectancy in the 70s, maybe some even in the 80s. This century also happens to be the century that the Industrial Revolution began, and we began the widespread use of fossil fuels. We also discovered a dangerous downside of fossil fuels. Burning all those fossil fuels releases catastrophic amounts of carbon dioxide that is overheating our world, creating existential threats of global warming and climate change. The details of these threats are especially difficult to comprehend because there are so many interacting factors operating on vastly different timescales from our human perspective. Earth has warmed and cooled countless times in the past, drastically changing its climate, but never with 8 billion Homo sapiens around. Suddenly, knowing about Earth's past has become the window into our future, offering a way to get our story right if we only pay attention. Fortunately, scientists have been studying these ideas for a long time, and in the last 50 to 60 years have come to understand they foretell the most profound events of humanity's existence. Not everyone has the background or time or motivation to study the complexity of global warming and climate change. However, it is vitally important that we have some basic understanding of these crises so that we believe in their truth. The future of life on Earth, as we know it, depends on decisions we make in the next few years. Sometimes when we are trying to understand something very complicated, we consider an easier concept to model the idea we are trying to understand. If we are lucky, we might gain crucial insight into what we hoped to understand better. The Earth and its cycles, the sun, energy, endless time, are very complicated and not easy to understand, as shown in the slide right here. Many, many different factors. With that goal in mind, I wrote a cookie parable about climate change. If you are uncertain about global warming and climate change, or how they work, or if they are real, I'm hoping this parable might provide a little insight into how the balance of energy can result in real life and death outcomes from very simple behaviors. If you already understand global warming and climate change, how they work, this will probably seem way too simplistic for the magnitude of the problems we face. Energy is something every life form needs, every moment of every day. We humans get our energy by eating food, which includes carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals. We also need oxygen and water. For a healthy life, these components must be consumed in a balanced amount. We humans make our energy by combusting our food with oxygen we breathe. We also make waste products of carbon dioxide and water. Eat too few calories and you will be underweight. Eat too many calories and you will be overweight. Eat just the right amount of calories and you have a balanced, sustainable weight. This is Olaf. Olaf's going to help us understand how important it is to have the proper balance of energy to maintain a healthy life. He lives in a small town called Industry City. You can probably tell by its name that Industry City believes in good old-fashioned capitalism. Olaf was just an average guy who made his living in the gig economy. He made just enough money to support himself and felt mostly satisfied with his lifestyle. One area he wanted to improve was his diet. Olaf decided to figure out what his daily calorie needs were so he could live a more healthy life. In high school, he had taken a few science classes, so he decided to try and do this scientifically. He started keeping a record of every type and precise amount of food and drink he consumed every day to know exactly how many calories went into his body. Olaf also kept a record of all his daily activities to know how many calories he burned. In other words, he became a scientist and collected a lot of data over an extended period of time to determine calories consumed and calories burned. Olaf was looking for a balanced approach for health. A single day's worth of data would not give an accurate answer to Olaf's average daily calorie needs. Even 1 week of data is not enough, because of natural fluctuations that occur in life. How much water did he drink? How much sweat did he lose? Did he weigh himself when he woke up or after a meal? Was his clothes on or off? Was it a holiday celebration or a busy workday? There are many variables to keep track of, but that's the way it is in most science experiments. It's not like flipping a coin and seeing heads or tails. That's easy. But keeping track of all these complicated details is more difficult. Olaf started off with a healthy weight of 150 pounds, and over a few months determined that his body required 2,500 calories per day. He limited himself to 2,500 calories a day for an entire year, and faithfully kept his same exercise routine. To his great delight, his weight didn't fluctuate at all. He had used science to improve his life. So far, so good. One day, a new deluxe cookie store opened in Industry City and introduced Olaf to Grandma's chocolate cream-filled cookies. They were kind of expensive at $1 a cookie, but Olaf loved them and started eating 1 cookie every day as a treat. The $30 extra a month cut into his budget, but the company ads were so tempting and the flavors so delicious that he couldn't resist. He decided he could exercise on his own and dropped his sports club membership to cover the cost. Olaf checked and found that Grandma's chocolate cookies had about 50 calories each, so he was eating 2,550 calories per day. This didn't seem like a big deal to Olaf, because 50 calories is hardly anything. Somehow, Olaf avoided the temptation of binging on an entire pack of Grandma's chocolate cookies all at once. Olaf did some research and found that 1 pound of body weight is about 3,500 food calories, so he borrowed research data from other scientists. He wondered how long it would take to gain 1 pound at 50 calories extra a day. This turned out to be a simple calculation to find out how many days it would take to eat enough extra calories to gain 1 pound. So he took the 3,500 calories per pound times 1 pound and divided it by 50 calories a day and came up with 70 days. That's a lot of days, and no one would even notice that he gained an extra pound. A year went by, and Olaf's cookie a day became an entrenched habit, and Olaf was 5 pounds heavier. He had to loosen his belt 1 notch, but still nothing to worry about. It was no big deal, an extra 5 pounds. Olaf even thought he looked stronger. But Olaf did not stop eating the extra cookie. His habit continued for 8 years. During this period, Grandma sold her company to a corporation. In the 9th year, Grandma's Chocolate Cookie Corporation decided to offer a special deal of 2 cookies for $1.75 to expand their market share. Even though Olaf couldn't afford it, he also couldn't control himself and started eating 2 cookies a day. The next year, Grandma's Cookie Corporation continued to expand and introduced another special deal of 3 cookies for $2.50, and Olaf started eating 3 cookies a day in his 10th year. After 10 years of denying there was a problem and eating extra cookies, Olaf found himself about 68 pounds heavier from eating 237,000 extra calories. 8 years at 1 cookie a day, 1 year at 2 cookies a day, 1 year at 3 cookies a day, added up to 237,000 calories. Olaf had hardly noticed, because it happened so slowly. Unfortunately, Olaf did start to notice some downsides of the extra weight after 10 years of bad eating habits. He started getting prediabetes, a little bit of heart disease. His blood pressure went up. He got tired more easily. Grandma's Cookie Corporation didn't care, because their whole goal was to continually grow their market share and make a larger profit for their shareholders. Olaf's health wasn't part of their business plan. This was just good old-fashioned capitalism at work. Increase growth, increase profit. And how long can you continue that? According to the capitalists, forever. Yet, it was just a few delicious little cookies a day that got him into this potentially life-threatening situation. Olaf knew what should have happened. He could have eaten fewer calories in his usual daily diet. Or he could have balanced those extra calories with more exercise versus being a couch potato. Or he could have done a little bit of both. There are lots of ways Olaf could have modified his lifestyle to eat that extra cookie and still maintain a healthy weight, if he had only applied his knowledge of the energy inputs and outputs. It all felt overwhelming to Olaf, but he decided it was important to regain control of his life and live a more healthy lifestyle according to science of nutrition. This had become an existential life or death moment for Olaf. To lose those 68 excess pounds, Olaf would have to cut his calories by 237,000 calories. That's a lot of calories. 68 pounds, 3,500 calories per pound. Yikes. Olaf couldn't lose all that weight in a day. He couldn't lose it in a week or a month. If he completely quit eating and still had a basal metabolism of 2,500 calories per day, it would take him about 95 days to lose those 68 pounds. That's over 3 months of starvation. 237,000 calories divided by 2,500 calories in a day, it's 95 days. Of course, if Olaf starved himself, his body metabolism would slow down and try and keep him alive. This means it would actually take him longer to lose the weight because the daily calories he burned would go down. Also, during starvation, Olaf's body would start to break down protein to maintain blood glucose levels so his brain cells didn't die. If part of the protein came from his heart, it might stop beating and he would die. Starving himself to lose all that extra weight at once was a very poor strategy to achieve a long-term healthy lifestyle. Olaf had to make a better plan, and he decided to use science as his guide. Olaf thought a more reasonable approach would be to cut 500 calories out a day. Living on 2,000 calories per day would take him 474 days to lose the 68 pounds. That means no cheating every day for 1.3 years. So you divide that 237 calories by 500 a day, gets 474 days. If Olaf did cheat and kept eating Grandma's cookies, his health would continue to deteriorate, and he might reach a tipping point and have a severe or even fatal heart attack, or he might get full-blown diabetes. 68 excess pounds comes with many potential bad consequences, but if he went on a plan to eat 500 calories per day less, he could achieve a healthy lifestyle. He could regain his healthy body. Olaf would need discipline of steel, but it would be worth it to get back to a healthy weight and lifestyle where he wanted to be. Olaf decided to take charge of his life and use his gift of intelligence more wisely to improve his many serious health problems. Olaf also decided to do some further research into the background of Grandma's chocolate chip cream-filled cookie corporation to help him make better choices. He found it was actually a subsidiary of a large corporation that was trying to expand the original mom-and-pop store into a nationwide chain. Their long-term goal was to grow the company, maximize profits to outcompete the competition by any means possible, including seductive advertising methods, which Olaf fell for. He suspected their goals did not match his goals. He also found that two of the main ingredients in the cookies, palm oil and high fructose corn syrup, had some bad side effects. Palm oil wasn't healthy for the planet, and high fructose corn syrup wasn't healthy for people. Palm oil is a type of vegetable oil that is relatively high in less healthful saturated fats, at about 50%, along with about 50% more healthful unsaturated fats. Saturated fats are linked to an increased risk of heart disease. Olive oil is a more healthful oil, having only about 15% saturated fats and 85% more healthful unsaturated fats, but it's also more expensive. Food companies tend to go with lower cost, so palm oil is in lots of food. High fructose corn syrup has been shown to promote inflammation, which is associated with an increased risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and metabolic dysfunction. But it is extra sweet, and it is less expensive, so food companies love it, no matter any health risk. Palm tree plantations are bad for the planet. Palm oil production is said to be responsible for about 5% of the world's deforestation of rainforests, which contributes to global warming and climate change. This was a surprise to Olaf because he never thought cookie ingredients could be bad for our planet. Nature's diversity in a rainforest is traded for monoculture farming of palm trees and other products like corn and soybeans. Monocropping is the practice of growing the same crop on the same plot of land year after year. Monoculture is widely used in intensive farming by big agribusiness. About 55% of these crops feed people, 36% feed livestock, and 9% goes to biofuels. Then it takes about 6 kilograms of plant protein to make 1 kilogram of animal protein. So we could feed a lot more people with plants than with animals. Okay, so deforestation turns a beautiful rainforest into this. Healthy, diverse rainforests that we clear cut and burn are replaced by unsustainable monoculture agriculture products like palm oil, corn, and soybeans. Irreplaceable species, biospecies, are lost forever when the rainforests are destroyed. Monoculture palm oil plantations are used for food products, detergents, and cosmetics. Monoculture cornfields are used to feed livestock and make biofuels. Monoculture soybeans are mainly used to feed beef cattle and other livestock, but also used in foods and biofuels. Monoculture farming depletes soils of nutrients, making them less productive over time, and it reduces organic matter in soils and valuable organisms, which can cause significant erosion. It puts the world's long-term food production at risk from heavy use of fertilizers that add back in nitrogen and phosphorus, which are lost in repeated growing seasons. The fertilizers, which take a lot of energy to make, are needed to maximize growth. However, the fertilizers add too much nitrogen and phosphorus to the land, which means runoff into streams and makes its way to the oceans. All over the world, this causes bacterial blooms in the oceans that use up all the oxygen and suffocate all of the animal life there, creating hundreds of dead sea zones around the world, totaling an area about the size of New Zealand. Monocropping also allows the spread of pests and disease. Since monocrops share the same genetic makeup, disease can spread rapidly through the entire fields. Pesticides and herbicides are used to kill pests and weeds, but they also kill pollinators, like bees and flies, and they kill essential organisms that live in the soil, like worms and bacteria. These chemicals make their way into the land and the water and create toxic pollution. These are externalities of modern agribusiness. If soil degradation continues, it is estimated that we may only have 60 years of fertile soil left on Earth. Also, rainforests make their own rain, which is lost when they are chopped down or burned, leading to drought. You can get bacterial blooms leading to death in the sea zones, and there's many hidden dangers of pesticides and herbicides, like losing pollinators, bees and flies, which is a major threat to our food production. In 1800, it took about 150 human hours and 70 ox hours to grow about 1 ton of grain per hectare. That's about 2.5 acres. One farmer could feed about 3 to 5 people, and 83% of the labor force worked on farms. The world's population was less than 1 billion, so they could get away with that. Despite the many dangers of climate change, fossil fuels stimulated the advances in farming machinery, equipment, fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus, which are necessary for the soil, commercial seeds, transportation, and much, much more. Now, currently, it takes less than 2 human hours to produce 3.5 tons of grain. You can see the turnaround is incredible. Only about 1% of the labor force works on farms, and one farmer can feed 166 people. There's enough food to actually feed the almost 8 billion people on Earth, but the way we are doing it, it's not sustainable. We need to find a workable approach because Earth's growing population in the coming decades will need even more food. We can't run out of soil. We need a healthy world. Many people assume that technology will solve our problems. It's true, technology does a lot of remarkable things, but it's not all good. Bottom trawling fishing uses gigantic metal nets to catch huge amounts of fish, but indiscriminately destroys ocean habitats and depletes the breeding stocks. Chainsaws allow rainforests to be destroyed much faster than ever. And there is more than 5 trillion pieces of plastic floating in the oceans, increasing every year. All of these are gifts of modern technology. It was actually technology that helped create the problem of globalization across the entire Earth that is destroying nature's ability to regenerate itself in a world with too many people. Some people say it all began with Columbus's voyages to the New World in 1492. Plastics cover a lot of area in the ocean. Globalization seeks to use every nook and cranny, capturing every ounce of resource, regardless of environmental damage, paying the lowest possible wages, regardless of human poverty, maximizing consumption to make maximum profits for large corporations by shipping goods all over the world. The power of corporations has grown to almost exceed the power of nations. We have globalized environmental damage, globalized human labor exploitation. Globalized markets maximize corporate profits over protecting nature and encourage overconsumption. Even the United States Supreme Court in 2010, in the Citizens United case, said that corporations have the same rights as people. So, except for the fact that corporations control trillions of dollars, they are just like you and me. The cookie parable was written to avoid discussing the darker scientific realities of climate change, and only hints at some of the problems we face. It portrays in a simplistic, familiar example life-threatening changes that can happen to a person from a simple energy imbalance, and the factors that can influence that imbalance. Similar life-threatening energy imbalances are changing our world. By burning massive amounts of fossil fuel, we are adding too much carbon dioxide, that's the calories, which retains too much energy in our world. That's Olaf's excess weight, and it's overheating our Earth, disrupting Earth's 10,000 years of relatively stable climate. That's Olaf's health. By ignoring the science, we are making a tough problem into an existential crisis. Olaf made his health worse by denying there was a problem for 10 years. What we are doing to the energy balance in our world is happening pretty slowly on a human timescale, decades to centuries. but incredibly fast on Earth's time scale, which is normally thousands to millions of years. Olaf's energy balance problem is much easier to understand on our shorter human time scale, days, weeks, months, years, but both have threatening consequences in different time dimensions. We've been living beyond our means and need to rapidly cut back on burning fossil fuels to regain a more healthy Earth. We need to understand that nature is not unlimited, and we must live more sustainably with what nature provides. While climate change may not seem real, it has happened many times before in Earth's history, just not with 8 billion Homo sapiens on the planet and growing. All this pressure has pushed life beyond Earth's limits, sometimes called the carrying capacity, and that is our real problem. What is truly alarming is we are doing it so much faster than many previous examples in Earth's history. These are some of the factors that make our world warmer. Can't go into each of them in detail, just mention them. We have the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, water, methane, and so forth. The Milankovitch cycles, which change where the sunlight reaches the Earth, but on the basis of the Earth's orbit and its tilt, and pushes Earth in and out of ice ages. Milankovitch cycles also affect the feedbacks of carbon dioxide and Earth's albedo. Thawing permafrost in tundra can release huge amounts of methane and carbon dioxide. This is a great worry. Deforestation by clear-cutting and burning takes away nature's ability to recycle carbon dioxide. We already mentioned a lot of the agricultural problems and methods. Air and ship travel require energy-dense fossil fuels, so renewables aren't going to work on these guys. Things like cement and steel require huge amounts of energy that will not work with renewables, with electricity from renewables. Okay, they release a lot of carbon dioxide. We have the problem of population going up and up, making every problem that we see into a more challenging problem. At times in Earth's history, volcanic activity has been pivotal, been huge, but currently we're in a very low activity time period. Usually volcanoes blow out aerosols, sulfur dioxide, that cool the Earth for a few years until they're washed out of the atmosphere. But the carbon dioxide stays there for hundreds of years and heats the Earth back up. So this has been a typical case over history, but not now. We're doing it ourselves. Some people say variations in solar activity are important. On the time scale we're talking about, they don't mean anything. Well, over long time scales, billion years, they might mean something. Melting ice raises the sea levels. Okay, that's a problem. It also decreases the albedo, which is the light reflected away from the Earth. When we have a lot of snow and ice, say at the poles, North Pole, South Pole, 85% of the energy is reflected away. And so the Earth is not heated as much. But if this ice melts, like is happening in the Arctic, only 7% is reflected away, and 83% is absorbed, making the Earth warmer. These are some of the consequences of a warmer world. So again, I'm just going to mention them. Loss of fresh water from melting mountain glaciers, more intense tropical storms, hurricanes, typhoons, increased flooding and drought. Unstable jet stream alters the weather patterns, say like recently happened in Texas where it got freezing cold, and up in Canada where unbelievably the temperature went up to 121 degrees. Melting permafrost also makes the ground unstable, so buildings and roads collapse, and it can release ancient diseases that are frozen into the permafrost. Drought causes more intense fires and the spread of beetle pest. Higher temperatures can lower the agricultural yields in a time where we need more food than ever. Increased ocean acidity is sometimes called global warming's evil twin. It's deadly to life in the ocean. All kinds of problems. Loss of coral reefs and ocean diversity, just a 2-degree increase in the ocean basically will wipe out the coral reefs, which is happening right now. They estimate 50% of the Great Barrier Reef has died off. Mass migrations are inevitable. We saw one in Syria when they had food problems in there because of climate and, of course, political instability. Flooding in coastal zones from melting polar glaciers, North Pole and South Pole. Spread of tropical diseases. As the temperature gets warmer in the higher latitudes, let's say towards north and south, then those diseases can spread north and south, like malaria, things like that. And there's also the possibility of contamination and depletion of essential water tables. So water is a crucial resource for the world. Every idea on this slide could be a lecture all on its own. There are many possible tipping points that we need to avoid at all costs, or we lose control of the climate. So every problem on the previous slide would potentially become much worse. Right? So these are things that nature takes over and controls if we let it get out of control. We have the Greenland ice and the Antarctic ice sheets. This could raise Earth's sea levels hundreds of feet. This would take probably hundreds of years down here. But the Greenland ice has melted very quickly in past periods. The ice in the Arctic Sea has algae that grows underneath it, and that's the base of the food chain for many, many organisms. If all that ice melts, then that algae is gone, and then all those the food chain collapses. We have boreal forests up in the northern Canada and Siberia. These are drying out with the heat. They're burning, a lot of them are. The permafrost that I mentioned earlier has a lot of methane and carbon dioxide. As it melts, it releases that, accelerating our problems, making them even worse. We have an ocean current that comes up to the Greenland area, sinks down it, and goes all the way down to the South Pole area. And when it goes down, it carries oxygen and nutrients that allow life at the bottom of the ocean to live. If that collapses, then life at the bottom of the ocean suffers. A lot of it can die. We have the monsoons, the African and the Indian monsoons that bring water to these regions that allow crops to grow. People count on that. The Amazon rainforest is intentionally being burned and cut down, and as it does, it starts to dry out. We lose that water that it supplies, and it ceases to be a rainforest and becomes a savanna. Okay, if that happens, we lose much of the diversity on Earth. Okay, so again, every idea on this slide could be a lecture all on its own. We have several renewable energy possibilities, but most of these have not matured fully. They have challenges to overcome, and it takes time to implement them. And we have to do it in a sustainable way, that's a challenge, because Earth's resources are limited. But we have solar panels that can make electricity. Okay, it's intermittent. It's not going to work at night or when there's a lot of clouds. We have windmills that can supply electricity that works when the wind's blowing. So these are very useful to us, but they mainly supply electricity, and sometimes we need fossil fuels. We have hydropower, which has been around even longer. This supplies a fair amount of energy, maybe 7% or so. It's renewable, but it only works if there's water running. And in the west, where I live, where our dams are going dry. Okay, they're getting very, very low. Water can also be used for agriculture and things like that. There's geothermal, doesn't require fuel. It's renewable, it's sustainable, but it's restricted to certain locations, and it has a lot of cost associated with it. There's hydrogen. This would be a great fuel if we can ever master it. They have gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen. This isn't so great because they have to use fossil fuel to make it. But green hydrogen can be made from water and renewable electricity. Okay, they can electrolyze the water. It's very expensive. Hydrogen is very hard to work with. Okay, it's hard to transport. It's dangerous. So they still haven't mastered this, but they are driving cars that actually run on hydrogen. Energy conservation, this is something we can do right now. It's not going to save us, but the little acts can help out. There's tidal energy. It's carbon neutral, sustainable, predictable. The equipment lasts a long time, up to 100 years. But we don't know exactly what it's going to do to waves and marine life. And it's expensive to build. There's nuclear, which probably needs to be part of our solution. It's carbon neutral. Very good source of electricity, 24/7, except if they do a check on the instrumentation. It's very powerful, It supplies 20% of U.S. electricity. It's not renewable because there's a limited amount of uranium, but there's probably 200-300 years of that we know of. It's long-time toxic waste. That's a problem. Thousands and thousands of years. Has high initial cost, and there's the danger of terrorism. So again, each one of these could be a lecture all on its own. So, a powerful event transformed our world, but had unforeseen consequences that requires correction. That was about 200 years ago, the Industrial Revolution. In 1776, James Watt, in Britain, greatly improved the steam engine, which ran on coal, and jump-started the Industrial Revolution. This was one of the most significant advances in humanity's history, and improved the lives of humanity enormously, leading to better lives, better health and medicine, more food production, more goods, more consumption, and more efficiency, but always with the result that there were more people. More people, more stuff, more energy, leads to degradation of the environment, depletion of natural resources, more pollution. How long can we do that? Forever? Industrialization requires dense sources of energy, which have been abundantly supplied since we learned how to extract fossil fuels from the earth, the coal, the oil, the natural gas. Unfortunately, many of the problems discussed in this presentation are attributable to burning excess amounts of fossil fuel, releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide, which is warming the earth and acidifying the oceans. At first, we didn't know this would happen. It took us about 200 years to figure it out, and realize the seriousness of these problems. But now we know they are real. Sadly, we did not listen to the scientists sounding the alarms over 50 years ago, leaving us with only a decade or two to avoid some very serious existential outcomes. The fossil fuels that we burn come out of the ground. They were formed from ancient plants and organisms in the Carboniferous period. That was 200, 300 million years ago. They were laid down over about 100 million years. We take those fossil fuels and we combust them. And it releases carbon dioxide and water and a lot of energy. This energy is really prehistoric solar energy. These plants that grew 300 million years ago, they grew because of the sun. And then they got buried in the earth. We dug them up and captured the energy. It's this carbon dioxide and water. They're problems. They're heating up our world. There was another very powerful idea that transformed our world, but had unforeseen consequences. It also requires correction. Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, also in 1776, also in Britain. He formalized the ideas of capitalism, promoting the concepts of supply and demand, the profit motive, self-interest, leading to our modern dominant economic system. Adam Smith's ideas were also some of the most significant in humanity's history. It turns out his ideas also helped create serious problems that confront us today. Capitalism depends on capital. That's stuff and money. Labor, people, land, we'll call that nature. Under prior feudal systems, land was held in common, shared by people. They called it the commons. Often, indigenous people protected the commonly held resources because their livelihood depended on it. So some people refer to that as the triumph of the commons. Under capitalism, land became private, held by the capitalists to exploit for profit and growth. And it turned people into cheap labor. Sometimes this is called tragedy in the commons. At that time, land and resources in Britain were limited and an obstacle to maximizing growth and profits. In Adam Smith's time, Britain got around this problem by colonizing countries all over the world. We could call that globalization. Since Britain had so many colonies with abundant land and resources they could exploit, they had virtually unlimited access to colonized lands, labor, and untapped resources. Additionally, because indigenous people did not increase the monetary value of their land, the early capitalists felt they were justified in taking it away from them, to give the land a more useful purpose of making goods for profit by the capitalists. Then they turned the people then they used the people as a source of cheap labor, sometimes even as slaves. Market mechanisms under capitalism do not provide incentives for protecting the environment or the resources. They are externalities. Ruthless competition pushes firms to cut costs and optimize growth and profits in any way possible. The environment and workers fall prey to the compulsive market behavior of the capitalist mode of production. To be fair, Adam Smith favored the economics based on small firms and farms with a sense of loyalty to their place and neighbors. His ideas were reinterpreted by later economists. Neoliberal economist and Nobel laureate Milton Friedman was one of those economists who reinterpreted Adam Smith's ideas. He argued in the 1970s, a company has no social responsibility to the public or society. Its only responsibility is to its shareholders. Businesses' only social responsibility is to engage in activities designed to increase profits, so long as it engages in free competition without fraud. This selfish commandment has justified much suffering and destruction on earth. Reimagining capitalism. A lot of people are starting to do this now. So how one of these most influential ideas ever conceived, capitalism, needs to change if we are to save ourselves from climate change. So this is one possibility that seems attractive, like a good idea. It's called the donut economics. It's a new visual framework conceived by Kate Raworth for sustainable development. It denies the concept of endless GDP growth. GDP just depends on money transfers. It doesn't depend on things that don't have money involved. Instead, the donut economics values sustainability over profits and growth and combines the complementary concepts of planetary boundaries and social boundaries. So social boundaries are life's essentials. We want more of these. We want enough of these for everybody: water, food, health, education, and so forth. Equity, housing, networks, and energy. We want these. They are on the inside of the donut, and we want to get as close to the inside cake as we can for all of these. Planetary boundaries are things on the outside, out here around the outside. We don't want too much of these because they use up the Earth's ability to help us. Climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers, freshwater withdrawals, land conservation, biodiversity loss, air pollution, ozone layer. These are all things that we cannot have too much of, or we are in trouble. Some of these we've already overshot. And so we have to try and get control of those. Ozone was one of them. So the ozone layer, we actually overshot this considerably, but we caught it in the late 80s and 90s, and we've been lowering it since then by reducing chlorofluorocarbons. The name of the donut, the name comes from the shape of the donut. The center hole depicts the proportion of people that have access to life's essentials, while the outer crust represents the ecological ceilings that we depend on and we must not exceed. An economy is considered prosperous when all of the 12 social foundations are met without overshooting any of the 9 ecological ceilings. So it's a question: is this an attainable goal, or is it just an idealistic impossibility? Capitalism is so entrenched in our world, it's hard to say if we could ever displace it. But we do have to consider new ways of thinking, because our old ways are not working. Here are some new ways of thinking that offer possible solutions to the problems of climate change and global warming: resilience, sustainability, living with nature, climate change. So we need resilience. That's the ability to prepare for and respond to hazard events and disturbances related to climate. We need to assess how climate change will create climate-related risk and take steps to better cope with these. And mitigation and adaptations are 2 of the main strategies. We need sustainability. Sustainability actually refers to 4 distinct areas: human, social, economic, and environmental. These are known as the 4 pillars of sustainability, shown over here. Climate change has already resulted in great changes in the global ecological degradation, such as shortage of water resources, aggravation of soil erosion, sharp decline in biodiversity, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and more. thus exerting significant impact on human, social development, and economic life. These all occur in a world of growing population, which magnifies everything. We need to live with nature. We must utilize nature-based solutions, such as conserving existing wetlands, restoring coastal mangrove forests, and switching to restorative agriculture practices that support healthy soils and feed Earth's growing population. There's a whole bunch of them here. There is a balance in nature that we have lost to our detriment. We must regain that balance. And we need climate justice. Our failure to address the social implications of climate change in a fair and just way results in profound economic and social tensions that promote dangerous societal instability. We need universal education. We need equal rights for women. We must reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in a socially just way, in better agreement with contemporary human rights, that is fair, more ethical, and more effective, allowing all people to live in better harmony with each other and with nature. We cannot save our world by abandoning the people at the bottom. The simple cookie parable became a lot more complicated when we considered additional factors. Mostly, this is a list of factors to be considered. The additional information is too simplified to fully describe how our world works. Many dedicated people have invested their entire lives searching for solutions to make the world safer for all of us. In return, we have to support them in every way possible. There's a lot more to talk about, but we'll have to wait for other lectures. Thanks for watching.